Hello everyone! Today's video covers all of the Gwent cards that can disrupt your hand, deck, or graveyard. Cards that can interfere with your deck can really mess with your strategy if you're playing a deck that relies on combos, and cards that can mess with your graveyard are particularly effective if you're playing a deck that relies on resurrection or putting cards back into your deck from your graveyard. For each card, we will go over the card's effect, how much you need to worry about it, and what you can do to mitigate the effects. Let's get on to the cards. First up is the neutral cards. Necromancy. Banish a unit from either graveyard and boost an ally by its power. This is not a card you really need to worry about. It has a pretty weak effect in almost every circumstance and requires a card on board that can be boosted. And I've never actually seen it in a ranked match outside of some bad experimentation of my own. You can pretty much forget about your opponent having this card, so don't worry playing around it. Next up, Regis Higher Vampire. Look at 3 random bronze units from your opponent's deck, consume 1. This is the only gold neutral card that can disrupt your deck, and has a very powerful effect at that. Not only does your opponent get a chance to move a card from your deck to your graveyard, but they also get to see some of what your deck has left in it. I've seen this card played the most in Consume Monsters decks, so if you're playing a deck that relies on a combo, try to get your whole combo into your hand before your opponent has a chance to use Regis. Next up is Scoia'tael, which only has one card that fits these criteria. Aglais lets you resurrect a special card from your opponent's graveyard. If you do, weaken self by 4. So Aglais is a 10-point card, or a 6-point card that can steal a special card from your graveyard. This might hamper your strategy if it relies on putting special cards back in your deck, which is not very common, or if you're playing an Ethne deck and want to resurrect that special card yourself. I've almost never seen Aglais played, so if you're playing against Scoia'tael, you don't really need to worry about what they're going to be doing to your deck or graveyard, and you can focus on what's on the board and executing your own strategy. Next, we'll talk about Nilfgaard, which is the king of disruption. Although Nilfgaard is widely considered the weakest of the 5 factions at this point in the game, they have many different options that can mess with your deck, so when you're playing against them, watch out. First up, we have Assire Var Anahid. Shuffle up to 2 cards from either graveyard into that player's deck. Usually Assire is used by the Nilfgaard player to put cards back in their own deck for combos. But Assire can also put cards from your graveyard back into your deck. This can potentially disrupt your draw by putting low value cards back in your hand, or putting cards that you wanted in your graveyard back into your hand. For example, playing Queensguard resurrects all other Queensguards, but if they're in your deck, you can't play the combo. Assire putting those cards from the graveyard back into your deck will disrupt that strategy. Assire is pretty common in Spy Nilfgaard decks. If you're playing a Resurrection deck, you might want to play around Assire if you think your opponent is playing a Spy Nilfgaard deck. You can usually tell by them playing Calviate. Next up is the Guardian. Create 2 Lesser Guardians on top of your opponent's deck. The Guardian disrupts your draw by forcing your next 2 draws to be Guardians, which are vanilla 6-point cards, rather than drawing your own card. I've seen this card as a throw-in to some decks that don't need another synergistic silver, and since it doesn't have an immediate effect, there's really nothing to play around. If your opponent does play this card, however, you can completely nullify the effect by playing any card that shuffles your deck. This puts those Lesser Guardians somewhere in the middle of your deck instead of on top, so you're much less likely to draw it. Next up is Sweers. Choose an enemy or revealed opponent, and move all copies of it from your opponent's deck to their graveyard. Sweers is in most reveal decks, as well as some Mill Nilfgaard decks, and is one of the few cards that can manipulate your deck in a targeted way. To play around Sweers, if one of your muster cards gets revealed, play it right away so he can't remove the other cards from your deck. Another type of deck Sweers can disrupt are decks based on Henselt pulling cards from your deck. If you play the first card to set up Henselt, you might just get Sweers putting the whole combo into your graveyard. This is a card that can lose you the game if you aren't careful. Fortunately, Reveal Nilfgaard decks are not very strong at the moment, which means that even if your whole combo gets thrown into the graveyard, it's not necessarily the end of the game. Treason. Play the bottom card from your opponent's deck. Treason directly plays a card from your deck, but it's only played in mill decks, so there's not much of a reason to worry about it. And since the effect is random, there's no way to play around it anyway. Just keep in mind that if your opponent plays Treason, expect it to be a mill deck and play accordingly. Xarthisius. Look at the top 3 cards in your opponent's deck. You may move one to the bottom of their deck. Xarthisius can disrupt your draw by putting valuable cards in the bottom of your deck. This can be countered by playing any card that shuffles your deck, although I don't think you need to worry much about Xarthisius, as he's almost never used. Next up is Vicovaro Medic. Resurrect a bronze unit from your opponent's graveyard. Vicovaro Medic lets your opponent play bronze cards from your graveyard, and this is the first bronze card we've seen so far. This card is only seen in Nilfgaard spy decks, and falls in and out of favor. Although it's a bronze card, you'll rarely see 3 in a deck, but even 2 in a deck can disrupt a Queensguard strategy, steal your Olgierd, or take a key card you were planning to resurrect or put back into your deck. To play around this card, get key cards out of your graveyard as soon as possible. Serrit. Set the power of a revealed unit in your opponent's hand to 1. Serrit is the only direct hand manipulation card, and is only seen in reveal decks, which aren't very popular. And it's not even seen that often in reveal decks at that. The only time to think about playing around it is if your opponent is playing a reveal deck and plays Cynthia, revealing your highest card. You might want to consider playing that card straight away to keep Serrit from reducing its value to 1. That's it for the Nilfgaard cards, on to Skellige. Birna Bran. Move a unit from your opponent's graveyard to yours. Birna Bran has 2 effects, one of which is moving a card out of your graveyard and into their own. This again will only disrupt decks that count on resurrection. Birna Bran is not a very popular choice due to her lack of immediate impact on the board, and isn't worth playing around. Donar An Hindar. Toggle a unit's lock. Discard a random bronze card from your opponent's deck to your graveyard. Donar can be a huge pain, and due to Skellige favoring resurrection-based decks, he can often be played twice in the same game. Not only does he get to lock your card, but if you're playing cards that rely on combos, there's a good chance one of your key combo cards is going to get yanked out of your deck and into your opponent's graveyard, which means you have basically no way to recover. He's in pretty much every Skellige deck, and the only ways to play around him are to get all your combo cards into your hand, so that he takes a lower value card. If your strategy is one where you plan on playing every card from your deck, there's not much you can do to keep him from being a high value card against your deck. Monsters. Caretaker. Resurrect a unit from your opponent's graveyard. Caretaker is another card that has the ability to take a card out of your graveyard permanently, disrupting resurrection strategies, and strategies that have you putting cards back into your deck. Caretaker sees more play in metas where resurrection archetypes dominate. Otherwise, he's almost never seen. Ghoul. Consume a random unit from either graveyard. Ghoul is almost never played, and the random aspect of it makes it not worth worrying about. Griffin. Move a card from one graveyard to the other. Griffin is another graveyard hate card that can disrupt your resurrection plan. Griffin is fairly weak against non-resurrection decks though, is only seen in resurrection heavy metas. Katakan. Consume a unit from either graveyard. Katakan is yet another graveyard hate card, seen only in resurrection heavy metas, but is almost always indexed in those metas. At worst, Katakan is a 9 to 12 point silver card. It also has the potential to be a disruptor, which makes him a versatile card in any meta. If you're up against monsters, be aware of Katakan. Lastly, we have Northern Realms, which has exactly 0 cards that fit this criteria. Thanks for watching the video. I hope this guide helps you pilot a new deck against some of the things that can disrupt your strategies. Let me know what kind of videos you want to see next in the comments. Thanks, bye.